Millionaire catches his new cleaning lady breastfeeding his daughter and takes unexpected action. The sound of a crying baby could break even the strongest man's resolve. Nicholas Rivers stood motionless in the marble hallway of his Connecticut mansion, his expensive Italian suit wrinkled from another sleepless night. The wailing echoed through rooms that once held laughter, now filled only with the desperate cries of a 2-month-old who seemed inconsolable no matter what anyone tried. "Mr. Rivers, I've tried everything," whispered Mrs. Caldwell, the third nanny this month, as she emerged from the nursery with dark circles under her eyes. The formula, the rocking, the white noise machine. She just won't settle. Nicholas nodded without looking at her, his jaw tight. 2 months. 2 months since Vivian had given him the greatest gift and taken it away in the same breath. 2 months since he'd held his wife's hand as she whispered Lila's name for the first and last time. 2 months of living in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. He walked past the nanny toward his home office, each step echoing against the cold floors. The morning routine never changed. Black coffee, financial reports, conference calls that kept his mind busy enough to forget that upstairs, his daughter needed something he didn't know how to give. Through the tall windows, he watched the groundskeeper trimming hedges with mechanical precision. Everything in his world moved like clockwork. Efficient, scheduled, emotionally sterile. Just the way he needed it to survive each day. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. "Cleaning service confirmed for tomorrow. New girl starts Monday." Nicholas barely glanced at the message. Another stranger in his house. Another face that would eventually leave like all the others. He'd stopped trying to remember their names. The crying upstairs intensified, and he found himself gripping his coffee cup tighter. Mrs. Caldwell's footsteps hurried back and forth above him, her muffled voice attempting to soothe a baby who seemed determined to reject every form of comfort. He closed his eyes and tried to focus on the quarterly report spread across his mahogany desk. Numbers made sense. Profit margins were predictable. Business decisions had clear outcomes. Unlike fatherhood, which felt like navigating through fog with no compass. His phone rang, a business call he'd been expecting. As he reached for it, the crying suddenly stopped. The silence was so abrupt, so unexpected, that Nicholas paused with his hand hovering over the phone. For 30 seconds, maybe a full minute, the house held its breath. Then the crying resumed, louder and more desperate than before. Nicholas answered the call, forcing his voice to sound steady and professional. But as he discussed merger possibilities and market projections, his mind wandered to the nursery upstairs, to the tiny person who shared his DNA but felt like a stranger. After hanging up, he found himself climbing the stairs, though he couldn't say why. At the nursery door, he stopped. Mrs. Caldwell was pacing with Lila, her movements growing more frantic with each step. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I don't understand why she's so fussy. The pediatrician said she's perfectly healthy, but it's fine," Nicholas interrupted, though it wasn't fine. Nothing had been fine since the day Vivian's complications turned their joy into grief in a matter of hours. He watched his daughter's red, scrunched face, her tiny fists waving in frustration. She was beautiful, Vivian's delicate features mixed with his strong jawline, but looking at her felt like staring into a mirror that reflected everything he'd lost. "Take a break," he told Mrs. Caldwell. "I'll stay with her for a while." The nanny looked relieved as she handed over the baby and hurried downstairs. Nicholas held Lila awkwardly, the way he'd learned from YouTube videos and parenting books that felt useless in real life. "I don't know what you want from me," he whispered to her, his voice barely audible over her cries. "I don't know how to be what you need." The afternoon sun streamed through the nursery windows, casting long shadows across the room, filled with expensive toys that Lila was too young to appreciate. Everything was perfect on the surface. The designer crib, the organic cotton bedding, the state-of-the-art baby monitor. But perfection couldn't fill the void left by a mother's absence. As evening approached, Nicholas finally handed Lila back to Mrs. Caldwell and retreated to his office. He worked until midnight, the sound of crying becoming background noise he'd learned to ignore. Sunday passed the same way, and Monday morning arrived with its usual routine. Coffee, reports, and the persistent awareness that somewhere in his house, his daughter was struggling with something he couldn't fix. At 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Nicholas glanced up from his computer as Mrs. Caldwell's voice drifted from the foyer, greeting someone new. The cleaning service, he remembered. Another temporary presence in his carefully controlled world. He returned to his work, expecting the usual sounds. Vacuum cleaners, footsteps moving efficiently through rooms, the polite invisibility of hired help. But 20 minutes later, something changed. The crying stopped again, and this time it stayed stopped. Nicholas found himself listening to a silence so profound it made him abandon his desk and walk toward the nursery, his heart beating faster with each step. At the doorway, he stopped dead. A young woman with natural blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail was sitting in the rocking chair, holding Lila against her chest. But she wasn't just holding her, she was nursing her, her movements gentle and instinctive, her face serene with the kind of peace Nicholas hadn't seen in his house since Vivian died. For a moment that stretched like eternity, Nicholas couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was witnessing. His daughter, his inconsolable, constantly crying daughter, was completely calm, her tiny hand resting against this stranger's chest, her breathing deep and steady. And in that silence, Nicholas realized something that would change everything. For the first time since Lila was born, she looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a baby at peace. The world stopped spinning the moment their eyes met. Elena Brooks froze mid-motion, her green eyes wide with panic as she realized she'd been caught in the most intimate act imaginable with a stranger's child. Her heart hammered against her ribs as Nicholas Rivers stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, his expensive suit making him look like a figure from a different universe than the one she inhabited. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible as she carefully adjusted her shirt while keeping Lila secure against her chest. She was crying so hard and Mrs. Caldwell had to step out for a moment, and I have a 2-year-old son and my body still. She trailed off, unable to finish explaining something so personal to this imposing man whose presence filled the doorway like a storm cloud. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment as she prepared for the inevitable explosion of anger, the accusations of overstepping boundaries, the immediate dismissal from a job she desperately needed. But Nicholas didn't explode. He stood perfectly still, his dark eyes moving from Elena's flushed face to his daughter, who remained peacefully asleep against this stranger's chest. For 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. The only sound in the room was the gentle rhythm of Lila's breathing. How long has she been quiet? His voice was softer than Elena expected, devoid of the rage she'd braced herself for. About 10 minutes, Elena replied, still ready to bolt from the chair if he showed any sign of anger. I know I shouldn't have, but she seemed so distressed, and when babies cry like that, sometimes they're just hungry, and formula isn't always. She's been crying for 2 months.
That's pretty normal.
Nicholas stepped into the room, his movements careful and deliberate.
Like
2 months of specialists, nannies, different formulas, sleep consultants. Nothing worked. Elena watched him approach, noting the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried the weight of something far heavier than business stress. This wasn't the cold, distant millionaire she'd imagined when the cleaning agency briefed her about the job. This was a man drowning in grief and frustration, desperate for answers he couldn't buy. Sometimes, Elena began hesitantly, then gathered courage. Sometimes babies know what they need better than we do. Breast milk has antibodies, hormones that calm them. It's not just nutrition, it's comfort. Nicholas moved closer to the rocking chair, and Elena caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something else, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from sleepless nights and unanswered prayers. Your son, he said quietly. How old? 2 years old. Benji. Elena's voice grew stronger when she talked about her child. I'm still nursing him, though not as much as before. That's why I could help her. For the first time, Nicholas really looked at her, not as hired help or an intruder, but as a woman who had somehow accomplished what an army of professionals couldn't. She was younger than he'd initially thought, probably mid-20s, with the kind of natural beauty that didn't need expensive makeup or designer clothes to shine through. Her blonde hair was simple, practical, pulled back for work. But her eyes, those green eyes, held a warmth and competence that made something tight in his chest begin to loosen. Where is he now? Your son? With my mother. She watches him while I work. Elena shifted slightly, ensuring Lila remained comfortable. I told the agency I needed a schedule that would let me get back to him. Being away from him is difficult. Nicholas nodded, understanding more than she realized. Being away from your child, physically or emotionally, left a wound that never quite healed. Mrs. Caldwell appeared in the doorway, her face flushed from hurrying up the stairs. Oh, Mr. Rivers, I'm sorry. I was just getting some fresh air and... She stopped short when she saw the scene before her, her impossible charge sleeping peacefully in the arms of the new cleaning girl. Mrs. Caldwell, Nicholas said without taking his eyes off Elena and Lila. You can take the rest of the day off. The nanny's mouth opened in surprise, but she was too professional to question her employer's decision. Are you sure, sir? I can stay if, I'm sure. After Mrs. Caldwell left, the nursery fell into a comfortable quiet. Elena continued rocking gently, her movements instinctive and soothing. Nicholas found himself mesmerized by the sight of his daughter so completely at peace. What's your name? He asked. Elena Brooks. Elena. He tested the name, finding it suited her somehow. I'm Nicholas. I know. The agency told me about... She hesitated, then continued with gentle honesty. About your wife. I'm sorry for your loss. Nicholas felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever someone mentioned Vivian. But instead of the usual urge to flee the conversation, he found himself wanting to stay in this quiet room where his daughter slept peacefully for the first time in months. She would have known what to do, he said quietly. Vivian would have known exactly how to help her. Elena looked up at him, her expression full of compassion rather than pity. Maybe she did know. Maybe she led me here today. The words hit Nicholas harder than any business setback ever had. Not because they were religious or mystical, but because for the first time since Vivian's death, something felt right in his house. Lila stirred slightly, making a small sound of contentment before settling back into sleep. I should go, Elena whispered. She's calm now and I have other rooms to clean. But as she started to rise from the chair, Nicholas made a decision that surprised them both. Stay, he said, just until she wakes up naturally. Elena settled back into the rocker, and Nicholas pulled up the small chair from Lila's reading corner. They sat in comfortable silence, two strangers brought together by a baby's need and a moment of unexpected grace. And for the first time in 2 months, Nicholas began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, help had arrived in the most unlikely form imaginable. 3 days later, Nicholas couldn't stop thinking about the silence. He sat in his office, pretending to review quarterly projections while his mind wandered to Tuesday afternoon. How Lila had slept peacefully in Elena's arms for over an hour. How she'd awakened calm and content instead of screaming. How something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere of his house during those quiet moments. Mrs. Caldwell had returned Wednesday morning with her usual professional efficiency, but within hours, Lila was back to her inconsolable crying. The specialist formula, the expensive probiotics, the white noise machines, nothing worked. By Thursday evening, Nicholas found himself pacing his office, listening to the familiar sound of his daughter's distress echoing through the mansion. He'd tried not to think about Elena Brooks, but her image kept surfacing. The natural way she'd held Lila, the competence in her movements, the peace that had settled over his child like a blanket. Most of all, he remembered her eyes, that particular shade of green that held both strength and gentleness, the look of someone who understood what it meant to love a child completely. The crying upstairs intensified, and Nicholas made a decision that would have seemed impossible a week ago. He picked up his phone and dialed the cleaning agency. This is Nicholas Rivers. I need to speak with Elena Brooks. Yes, it's urgent. 20 minutes later, Elena stood in his home office doorway, still wearing her cleaning uniform from another client's house. Her blonde hair was slightly mussed, and there was a streak of furniture polish on her sleeve, but she looked more real, more genuine than anyone who'd entered his sterile world in months. Mr. Rivers? The agency said you needed to see me right away. Is everything okay? Nicholas gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. Please, sit, and call me Nicholas. Elena perched on the edge of the chair, her posture tense with uncertainty. Above them, Lila's crying created a soundtrack of desperation that made conversation feel almost surreal. How long has she been like that today? Elena asked, her maternal instincts clearly activated by the sound. Since noon, Mrs. Caldwell tried everything. Nicholas leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. Elena, I'm going to ask you something that might sound crazy. She waited, her green eyes focused entirely on him. I want to offer you a job. Not cleaning, taking care of Lila, full-time nanny position with a salary that would let you quit all your other clients. Elena's eyes widened. Mr. Rivers, Nicholas, I don't have formal childcare training. I'm just a mother who did in 10 minutes what trained professionals couldn't do in 2 months. Nicholas stood up, his decision crystallizing as he spoke. I've watched my daughter suffer for weeks. I've hired specialists, consulted pediatricians, tried every method and formula available. Nothing worked until you held her. The crying upstairs seemed to grow more desperate, and Elena's hands clenched in her lap. Nicholas could see her fighting the urge to rush upstairs and help. "I can't abandon my other clients without notice," she said carefully. "And I have my son to consider. My schedule with him is sacred. I won't compromise on that. Bring him here." The words surprised them both. Nicholas hadn't planned to say it, but once spoken, the idea felt perfectly logical. "What? Bring Benji with you. This house has enough space for 10 children. There's a playroom, a yard, anything he might need. You could work and still be with your son." Elena stared at him as if he'd suggested they all move to Mars. "You want me to bring my 2-year-old to your mansion while I care for your daughter? Why not? Lila needs what you can give her, and you need to be with your son. It solves both problems." Above them, the crying reached a crescendo, and Nicholas saw Elena's resolve begin to crack. Her maternal instincts were warring with her practical concerns, and he could tell which side was winning. "The salary would be 3 times what you make cleaning houses," he continued. "Full benefits, paid time off, and flexible scheduling around your son's needs." Elena was quiet for a long moment, listening to Lila's distress. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "If I do this, and I'm not saying yes yet, there would have to be boundaries, clear expectations. I won't be live-in help, and I won't be available 24 hours a day. I'm a mother first." "Understood. And I want to meet with Mrs. Caldwell to understand Lila's routine and any medical concerns." "Of course." Elena stood up, her decision made. "Let me go to her now. We can discuss details later, but right now, that baby needs help." Nicholas watched her hurry upstairs, and within minutes the crying stopped. The silence that followed felt like a miracle he was afraid to trust. 15 minutes later, Elena returned to his office with a calm, sleepy Lila in her arms. The transformation was so complete, so immediate, that Nicholas felt something shift permanently in his understanding of what his daughter needed. "She was overtired and overstimulated," Elena explained softly. "Sometimes babies need to feel completely safe before they can surrender to sleep. Breast milk has natural sedatives, but more than that, it's about the connection. The feeling of being held by someone who isn't anxious or frustrated." Nicholas studied his daughter's peaceful face. "You're not anxious with her." "No, babies are just babies. They cry when they need something, and they stop crying when they get it. The trick is figuring out what they're really asking for." And what was Lila asking for? Elena looked down at the sleeping child, then back at Nicholas. To feel loved without conditions, to be held by someone who wasn't afraid of her emotions. The words hit Nicholas like a physical blow. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He had been afraid of his daughter's needs, afraid of his own inadequacy, afraid of the love that felt too dangerous to fully embrace. "When can you start?" he asked quietly. Elena shifted Lila to her shoulder, the movement so natural it looked like she'd been caring for her forever. "I need 2 weeks to transition my other clients, and I want to bring Benji here for a trial day first, to see how he adapts to the environment." "Agreed." As Elena prepared to leave, she paused at the office door. "Nicholas, this isn't just about childcare. If I take this job, I'm going to help you learn to trust yourself with her. Lila doesn't need perfection. She needs presence." After she left, Nicholas sat alone in his office processing what had just happened. In the span of 30 minutes, he'd made a decision that would fundamentally change his household, his daily routine, and possibly his life. But as he listened to the unprecedented quiet upstairs, he realized something profound. For the first time since Vivian's death, he'd made a choice based on hope instead of fear. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what his family needed. The morning Elena brought Benji to the mansion, Nicholas realized he'd never actually been around a 2-year-old before. Standing in his marble foyer at 8:30 a.m., watching a tiny boy with sandy brown hair and curious hazel eyes clutch a worn stuffed elephant while staring up at the crystal chandelier, Nicholas felt completely out of his element. The child was so small, so animated, so utterly different from the controlled environment he'd carefully constructed around his grief. "Big house, Mama," Benji whispered, his voice filled with the kind of wonder that adults spend lifetimes trying to recapture. Elena knelt beside her son, her hand gentle on his back. "Remember what we talked about? We're here to help take care of baby Lila, and you're going to be Mama's special helper." Benji nodded solemnly, then looked directly at Nicholas. "You're Lila's daddy?" The simple question caught Nicholas off guard. "Yes, I am." "Where's her mama?" Elena's intake of breath was barely audible, but Nicholas heard it. The innocent question that every adult had learned to avoid, asked with the pure curiosity of childhood. She's not here anymore, Nicholas said carefully, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. It's just Lila and me now. Benji considered this with the seriousness of someone much older. That's sad, but Mama says babies need lots of love, so maybe we can help. Nicholas felt something crack open in his chest. Not the painful break he'd grown accustomed to, but something warmer, like ice, beginning to thaw. I'd like that, he heard himself say. Elena stood up, relief evident in her expression. Should we go see Lila? She's probably getting ready for her morning feeding. As they climbed the grand staircase, Benji's small hand trailing along the polished banister, Nicholas found himself seeing his house through different eyes. The soaring ceilings and expensive artwork that had once represented success now seemed cold and impersonal. But watching Benji's excitement at discovering each new room, he began to imagine what the space might feel like, filled with laughter and the chaotic energy of childhood. In the nursery, Lila was awake and beginning to fuss in her crib. Mrs. Caldwell looked frazzled, her usual composure cracking under the pressure of another difficult morning. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she said to Elena. "She's been restless since 6, and nothing I've tried has helped." Elena approached the crib with confident movements, lifting Lila with the ease of someone who understood exactly what the baby needed. Almost immediately, Lila's crying softened to mild fussing. "Benji, can you sit in the big chair and help me?" Elena asked, settling into the rocking chair they'd used during their first encounter. Benji climbed onto the chair beside his mother, his small hand patting Lila's back with surprising gentleness. "It's okay, baby. Mama's gonna help you feel better." Nicholas watched from the doorway as Elena began nursing Lila. The scene so natural and peaceful it seemed to transform the entire room.
Oh my gosh,
Mrs. Caldwell looked on with professional interest, taking mental notes about techniques she'd never learned in childcare training. "The key is staying calm yourself," Elena explained to the nanny. "Babies absorb our energy. If we're anxious, they become anxious. If we're peaceful, they can relax." Within minutes, Lila was contentedly feeding, her tiny fist wrapped around one of Benji's fingers. The toddler sat perfectly still, instinctively understanding the importance of quiet during this moment. "She likes you, Benji," Nicholas observed, moving closer to the chair. "I'm good with babies," Benji replied matter-of-factly. "Mama taught me. You gotta be gentle and whisper, like this." He leaned closer to Lila and whispered something incomprehensible but clearly heartfelt. Mrs. Caldwell shook her head in amazement. "In 3 months of trying, I've never seen her this calm during feeding time. What's your secret?" Elena smiled, adjusting Lila's position slightly. "No secret. Just patience and understanding that every baby is different. Lila needs to feel safe before she can eat peacefully. Most babies do. But I've been patient," Mrs. Caldwell protested. "I've followed every guideline, every recommendation from the pediatrician. Guidelines are helpful," Elena agreed diplomatically. "But sometimes you have to trust your instincts more than your training. Babies don't read textbooks." Nicholas found himself studying Elena's face as she spoke. The confidence in her voice, the natural authority that came from genuine experience rather than theoretical knowledge. She wasn't trying to show off or prove her superiority. She was simply sharing what she knew worked. "Can I hold her when she's done eating?" Benji asked softly. "If Daddy Nicholas says it's okay," Elena replied, glancing at Nicholas. The request should have made him nervous. His daughter in the arms of a 2-year-old seemed like a recipe for disaster. But watching Benji's careful attention to Lila's needs, the way he instinctively understood the importance of being gentle, Nicholas found himself nodding. "I'd like that." When Lila finished feeding, Elena carefully positioned her in Benji's arms, supporting both children with practiced ease. The sight of his daughter cradled by this serious little boy, both of them perfectly content, struck Nicholas as one of the most beautiful things he'd witnessed since Vivian's death. "She's so little," Benji marveled. "Was I this little, Mama?" "Even littler," Elena laughed. "You were the tiniest baby in the whole hospital." Mrs. Caldwell gathered her things quietly. "I'll give you some time to settle in," she told Elena. "If you need anything, I'll be in the kitchen reviewing my notes." After the nanny left, the nursery settled into comfortable quiet. Elena moved around the room, familiarizing herself with Lila's supplies and schedule, while Benji continued his gentle vigil with the baby. "Your house is really big," Benji told Nicholas conversationally. "Do you get lost?" Nicholas almost smiled. "Sometimes I feel lost, yes. Mama says when you're lost, you just gotta stop and look around till you find something familiar. Then you remember where you are." the wisdom of childhood, delivered without pretense or agenda. Nicholas looked around the nursery, at Elena efficiently organizing supplies, at his daughter peaceful in a stranger's child's arms, at the morning light streaming through windows that had seemed cold for months. For the first time since Vivian's death, something in his house felt familiar again. Benji's right, Elena said softly, overhearing the conversation. Sometimes we just need to stop trying so hard to find our way and let ourselves recognize what's already here. Nicholas met her eyes across the room, understanding passing between them without words. She wasn't just talking about getting lost in a big house, and somehow, surrounded by the peaceful scene of two children who seemed to understand exactly what they needed from each other, Nicholas began to wonder if maybe he wasn't as lost as he'd thought. Maybe he was exactly where he needed to be. 6 weeks later, Nicholas discovered that happiness could sneak up on you when you weren't looking. He stood in his kitchen doorway at 7 a.m., watching Elena prepare breakfast while Benji sat at the marble island, carefully spreading peanut butter on toast with the concentration of a surgeon. Lila dozed peacefully in her bouncy seat, occasionally making soft cooing sounds that seemed to punctuate the morning routine like gentle music. This wasn't how Nicholas had imagined his life would look. The pristine kitchen that had once been used only for reheating takeout now smelled like fresh coffee and something wonderfully domestic. Elena moved through the space with quiet efficiency, having learned where everything belonged, despite the fact that most of the cabinets had remained untouched for months. "Morning, Nicholas," she said without turning around, somehow sensing his presence. "Coffee's fresh and there's scrambled eggs if you want them." "You don't have to cook for me," he replied, though he found himself walking toward the coffee pot anyway. "I'm already cooking for Benji. 2 eggs or 3 doesn't make much difference." Benji looked up from his toast. "Daddy Nicholas, do you like grape jelly or strawberry?" The casual use of Daddy Nicholas still caught him off guard, though it had become Benji's natural way of addressing him over the past month. The title should have felt presumptuous or inappropriate, but instead it filled a space in Nicholas's chest he hadn't realized was empty. "Strawberry," Nicholas answered, settling onto the stool beside Benji. "Good choice. Mama likes strawberry too, but I like grape because it's purple and purple is funny." Elena laughed, the sound light and unguarded. "Purple is very funny, sweetheart." These morning conversations had become Nicholas's favorite part of the day. The easy chatter, the lack of agenda or business objectives, the simple pleasure of sharing space with people who didn't need anything from him except his presence. "How's the merger proposal coming along?" Elena asked, placing a plate of eggs in front of him. Nicholas was surprised she remembered. He'd mentioned the deal briefly 3 days ago, not expecting her to retain details about his work life. "Complicated. The other company's board is nervous about our expansion timeline. Maybe they just need more time to see the benefits," Elena suggested, settling Lila against her shoulder for a post-breakfast feeding. "Big changes are scary, even when they make sense." The observation was simple, but it struck Nicholas as unexpectedly insightful. Elena had a way of cutting through complexity to find the human element in any situation. "Sometimes I think you missed your calling," he said. "You'd make a good business consultant." Elena smiled, but there was something wistful in her expression. "I used to think about going back to school, getting a degree in child development or early education, but life has a way of changing your plans." "What stopped you?" "Benji happened." Her voice held no regret, only matter-of-fact acceptance. His father wasn't interested in being a father, so it was just me. Single motherhood doesn't leave much room for career dreams. Nicholas felt a familiar anger rise in his chest, not at Elena, but at the unknown man who had walked away from his responsibility. "His loss," he said quietly. "His loss, our gain," Elena replied, kissing the top of Benji's head. "Right, buddy?" Benji nodded vigorously. "We don't need him. We got each other, and now we got Lila and Daddy Nicholas." The matter-of-fact way Benji included him in their family unit made Nicholas's throat tighten with emotion. Somewhere in the past 6 weeks he'd become essential to this little boy's sense of security, just as they had become essential to his. "Speaking of which," Elena continued, "I was thinking we should start taking Lila outside more. The weather's getting nicer and fresh air is good for babies." "The garden?" Nicholas suggested. "There's a patio area that gets morning sun." "Perfect. And Benji could help with some simple gardening if you don't mind him digging in the dirt." Nicholas looked at his expensive landscaping, meticulously maintained, perfectly manicured, and completely sterile. The idea of a 2-year-old's chaos disrupting that perfection should have horrified him. Instead, he found himself curious about what the garden might look like with actual life in it. There's a garden shed with tools, he said. Probably kid-sized ones from when the previous owners lived here. Elena's face lit up. Really? Benji would love that. Wouldn't you, sweetheart? Can I plant flowers, purple ones? We'll see what we can find, Nicholas promised, surprising himself with the commitment. As breakfast continued, Lila grew fussy, and Elena transitioned seamlessly into caretaker mode. But instead of the desperate crying that had defined the first months of Lila's life, this was normal baby fussiness, easily addressed, quickly soothed. She's teething, Elena explained, offering Lila a soft teething ring. See how she's gnawing on everything? Her first tooth should come through any day now. Nicholas watched his daughter work the teething ring with determined concentration. How do you know these things? Experience and instinct. Plus, I read everything I could get my hands on when Benji was born. Knowledge makes you feel less helpless. I should have read more, Nicholas admitted. Before Lila was born, I thought having money meant I could hire people to handle the hard parts. I didn't realize that some things can't be outsourced. Elena's expression grew gentle. You're learning now. That's what matters. With your help. We're helping each other, she corrected. This job, this stability, it's changing our lives too. Benji finished his breakfast and scrambled down from his stool. Can I go see if the fish are awake? Nicholas had installed a small koi pond in the garden years ago, but had barely noticed it since Vivian's death. Benji, however, had become fascinated with the fish, visiting them daily and providing detailed reports on their activities. Stay where I can see you, Elena called as Benji headed for the patio doors. I will, Mama, as they watched him through the kitchen windows. Pressing his face against the glass of the pond's edge, Elena and Nicholas fell into comfortable silence. Lila had settled into her post-feeding drowsiness. Her tiny fist curled around Elena's finger. He's happy here, Elena observed softly. So is she. Nicholas replied, nodding toward Lila. And you? The question hung between them, more loaded than it appeared on the surface. Was he happy? The concept had seemed impossible 6 weeks ago, but sitting in his kitchen with morning light streaming through the windows and the sound of Benji's delighted laughter drifting in from the garden, Nicholas realized that yes, he was approaching something that felt dangerously close to happiness. I'm getting there, he said honestly. Elena smiled, and for a moment their eyes held across the kitchen island. Something unspoken passed between them. Not romantic, not yet, but an acknowledgement of connection, of lives becoming intertwined in ways neither had expected. Outside, Benji called excitedly, Mama, Daddy Nicholas, the fish are dancing. And as they both moved toward the window to see what had captured the boy's imagination, Nicholas realized that for the first time in months, he was looking forward to the day ahead instead of simply enduring it. Maybe that was how healing happened. Not in dramatic moments, but in the gentle accumulation of ordinary mornings that somehow added up to hope. The first time Nicholas held Lila without fear, she was 6 months old and covered in dirt. It happened on a Saturday afternoon in the garden, where Elena and Benji had spent the morning planting purple pansies in the raised flower beds. Nicholas had intended to watch from the patio, coffee in hand, maintaining his usual observer role. But Lila had other plans. She'd been sitting in her baby seat, fascinated by the earthworms Benji kept discovering, when she suddenly lurched forward with the determination of someone twice her age. Before anyone could react, she'd toppled sideways into the freshly turned soil, her chubby hands immediately grabbing fistfuls of dirt and bringing them toward her mouth. Lila, Elena lunged forward, but Nicholas was closer. Without thinking, he scooped his daughter up, dirt and all, holding her against his chest as she gurgled happily and tried to eat her muddy fingers. For the first time since her birth, his hands didn't shake. His breathing didn't become shallow. He simply held her, this messy, joyful little person who was clearly delighted with her adventure. She's filthy, he said, but he was laughing. First rule of gardening, Elena grinned, wiping a smudge of soil from Lila's nose. Everyone gets dirty. It's part of the fun. Benji appeared at Nicholas's elbow, his own hands caked with earth. Daddy Nicholas, Lila found a really good worm. Look. He held up a particularly fat earthworm that was doing its best to escape his enthusiastic grip. Lila squealed with delight, reaching for this new discovery with muddy fingers. Worms are good for gardens, Benji explained seriously. They eat the bad stuff and make the dirt happy. Ew. Is that so? Nicholas asked, genuinely curious about his sons. When had he started thinking of Benji as his son? Newfound expertise. Mama taught me. She knows everything about growing things. Nicholas looked over at Elena, who was kneeling beside the pansy bed, her blonde hair escaping from its ponytail, her cheeks flushed with exertion and sunshine. She'd changed since coming to work for him, not just her circumstances, but something deeper. The constant tension he'd noticed during those first weeks had gradually melted away, replaced by a contentment that made her seem younger, more vibrant. Not everything, Elena protested, but she was smiling. Just enough to keep plants alive and children fed. That's more than most people manage, Nicholas replied, surprised by the sincerity in his own voice. As if sensing the weight of the moment, Lila chose that instant to grab a handful of Nicholas's shirt and pull herself closer to his chest, leaving muddy handprints on his expensive cotton. Instead of the irritation he might have felt months ago, Nicholas felt only warmth. I think she likes gardening, Elena observed. She likes getting into trouble, Nicholas corrected, but his tone was fond. Don't you, troublemaker? Lila responded by blowing a dirt-filled bubble which sent Benji into peals of laughter. Can we plant something special for Lila? Benji asked suddenly. Like her own flower? Elena tilted her head, considering. What kind of flower do you think Lila would like? Benji studied his sister with the seriousness of a flower consultant. Yellow ones, like sunshine, 'cause she smiles a lot now. Marigolds, Elena suggested. They're cheerful and easy to grow and they bloom all summer. Perfect, Nicholas found himself saying. We'll plant marigolds for Lila. The word we had slipped out naturally, but it hung in the air with new significance. When had he become part of this garden project? When had he stopped being the employer watching his staff and started being part of the family creating something together? Elena must have noticed the shift too, because she looked up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. There's a nursery about 10 minutes away. We could go this afternoon if you want. All of us? Nicholas asked, still holding Lila, who was now trying to grab his nose with muddy fingers. All of us, Elena confirmed. 2 hours later, Nicholas found himself pushing a shopping cart through Green's Garden Center while Benji ran ahead examining every flower with scientific thoroughness. Elena walked beside him, Lila clean and content in her stroller, pointing at butterflies with the excitement of someone discovering magic. These ones, Mama, Benji called from the marigold display. They're perfect Lila flowers. Nicholas watched their children. When had that happened? With amazement. Benji's enthusiasm was infectious, and even Lila seemed captivated by the riot of colors surrounding them. But it was Elena's face that held his attention. She moved through the nursery with the same quiet competence she brought to everything. But there was something else, a lightness that spoke of dreams being fulfilled in unexpected ways. You love this, he observed quietly, as she helped Benji select the best plants. I always wanted a garden, she admitted. Growing up, we lived in apartments. No yard, no space for plants. I used to imagine what it would be like to have dirt under my fingernails from choice instead of necessity. And now? She looked around at the garden center, at Benji carefully carrying a flat of marigolds, at Lila reaching for a butterfly that had landed on her stroller. Now I'm living the dream I didn't know I was allowed to have. Something in her voice made Nicholas stop walking. Elena, I know this is temporary, she said quickly, not meeting his eyes. I know that eventually you'll want your space back, or you'll meet someone, or circumstances will change. I'm not naive about how these things work. What if I don't want my space back? The question surprised them both. Nicholas hadn't planned to say it, but standing in the middle of a garden center with his daughter reaching for butterflies and his Benji chattering excitedly about flower colors, he realized it was true. Elena looked up at him then, her green eyes searching his face for something. Nicholas, Daddy Nicholas, Mama, come see. I don't like this. Benji's voice broke the moment, but not the awareness that had passed between them. As they walked toward where he stood proudly beside his carefully chosen marigolds, Nicholas felt the shift that had been building for weeks finally crystallize. This wasn't just convenient childcare anymore. This wasn't just about solving Lila's crying or managing his household efficiently. This was about family. The family that had somehow grown around him when he wasn't paying attention, taking root in the spaces left empty by grief and flourishing in ways he'd never imagined possible. At the checkout counter, while Elena helped Benji count coins from his piggy bank to contribute to the purchase, Lila reached for Nicholas with both arms. He lifted her from the stroller, and she immediately settled against his chest with the complete trust of a child who knew she was exactly where she belonged. We're really doing this, he murmured to Elena as they loaded plants into his car. Doing what? Becoming a family. Elena's hands stilled on the marigold flat. When she looked at him over the car roof, her expression was soft but cautious. Are we? Nicholas looked at Benji, who was already planning where each flower would go, and at Lila, who was babbling happily in her car seat, and at Elena, whose green eyes held all the hope and fear of someone who'd learned not to trust happiness when it came too easily. Yes, he said simply, we are. And as they drove home with their car full of flowers and their children chattering about gardens and butterflies and marigolds like sunshine, Nicholas realized that sometimes the most important decisions weren't made in boardrooms or lawyers' offices. Sometimes they were made in the space between one heartbeat and the next, in a garden center on a Saturday afternoon, with dirt under your fingernails and love growing wild in all the places you'd forgotten to tend. The knock on the door came on a Tuesday morning, shattering the peaceful routine they'd built like glass against stone. Elena was in the kitchen making Benji's lunch when she heard the sharp rap echoing through the house. Nicholas had left early for a meeting, and she'd been enjoying the quiet morning with both children, Lila playing contentedly in her high chair, while Benji colored at the table, his tongue poking out in concentration. I'll get it, she called to Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper who came twice a week to handle the deeper cleaning. But when Elena opened the heavy front door, her blood turned to ice. Trevor Morrison stood on the marble steps exactly as she remembered him, tall, conventionally handsome, with the kind of easy charm that had once made her believe in fairy tales. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, his smile practiced and confident. He looked like success, like someone who had never struggled to pay rent or worried about where his next meal would come from. Hello, Elena. You look good. Domestic life suits you. Elena's hand tightened on the door handle. What are you doing here, Trevor? That's not much of a welcome for the father of your child. His blue eyes swept past her, taking in the opulent foyer, the crystal chandelier, the obvious wealth surrounding them. Nice place. Very nice. I can see why you've been so content. How did you find me? It wasn't hard. Small world, especially when someone starts working for one of the most prominent families in Connecticut. Trevor stepped closer, and Elena caught the familiar scent of his expensive cologne, the same one that used to make her heart race and now made her stomach turn. I've been keeping track of you, Elena, making sure you were taking good care of our son. The possessive way he said our son made Elena's protective instincts flare. You lost the right to call him that when you walked away, when you told me you weren't ready to be a father and disappeared for 2 years. People change, sweetheart. I've changed. I'm ready now. From the kitchen came the sound of Benji's voice, singing softly to himself as he colored. The innocent sound seemed to energize Trevor, his eyes lighting up with something that looked like ownership. That's him, isn't it, my boy? I want to meet him, Elena. No, the word came out sharper than Elena intended, but she didn't care. You don't get to waltz back into his life because it's suddenly convenient for you. Convenient? Trevor's expression hardened slightly, revealing the steel beneath his charming exterior. Elena, I'm his father. I have rights. Rights you forfeited when you abandoned us. I never abandoned anyone. I was honest about not being ready. There's a difference. Elena stepped outside and pulled the door nearly closed behind her, not wanting Benji to overhear this conversation. You were 25 years old, Trevor. I was 24. Neither of us was ready, but I didn't have the luxury of walking away because I felt like it. And look how well things worked out for you. Trevor gestured toward the mansion behind her. Beautiful house, wealthy employer who clearly treats you very well. Some might say you've done better than if we'd stayed together. There was something in his tone, an implication that made Elena's skin crawl. It's not like that, isn't it? Come on, Elena. Single mother struggling to make ends meet, suddenly living in a mansion with a grieving widower. It's a classic story. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? I did some research on Nicholas Rivers. Lost his wife recently, has a baby daughter, inherited a fortune from his publishing empire. Perfect target for someone with your assets. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment but from rage. Get off his property, now. I'm not going anywhere until I see my son. He's not your son. The words exploded from Elena before she could stop them. You don't get to claim him now, because it suits your purposes. Benji doesn't even know you exist, and I intend to keep it that way. Trevor's mask of charm slipped completely. That's where you're wrong, Elena. I've been talking to a lawyer. I have parental rights, whether you like it or not. I can petition for custody, for visitation. I can make your comfortable little life here very complicated very quickly. Elena's heart began racing, but she forced her voice to remain steady. What do you want, Trevor? Money? Because if that's what this is about, it's not about money. His smile returned, cold and calculating. It's about my son. It's about the family I'm ready to build now. I've met someone, Elena, someone special, and she wants children. Our children. Starting with Benji. The implication hit Elena like a physical blow. Trevor hadn't come back out of love or remorse or even genuine desire to be a father. He'd come back because his new relationship required a ready-made family, and Benji was the most convenient option. Over my dead body, she whispered. It doesn't have to be complicated. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous settlement, enough to set you up comfortably somewhere else. Start fresh. All I want is my son. Mama? Both adults turned to see Benji standing in the doorway, his small face creased with concern. Why are you talking loud? Who's the man? Elena's heart shattered. Her sweet, innocent boy, looking between his mother and the stranger, who wanted to tear apart the only life he'd ever known. It's okay, sweetheart. Go back inside. I'll be there in just a minute. But Trevor had other ideas. He stepped forward, his voice taking on a false warmth that made Elena's skin crawl. Hello, Benji. I'm Trevor. I'm a friend of your mother's. Benji studied him with the serious attention he gave to everything new. Are you here to see baby Lila too? No, buddy. I'm here to see you. Something in Trevor's tone must have felt wrong to Benji, because he moved closer to Elena, his small hand finding hers. I don't want to talk to him, Mama. You don't have to, sweetheart. Go inside now. Find Mrs. Pemberton. As Benji reluctantly disappeared into the house, Trevor's expression grew thoughtful. He's a good-looking kid. Smart. Takes after his father. What will it take to make you leave? Elena asked desperately. I already told you I want my son. And Elena? Trevor's voice dropped to a whisper that only she could hear. I know you've gotten attached to this place, to this life, to playing house with the grieving widower. But I can ruin all of that with one phone call to the right people. Rich men don't like scandal, especially involving their employees. How do you think Nicholas would feel if he knew about your past? About the kind of woman who abandons her child's father and then conveniently finds work caring for another man's baby. Elena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Everything she'd built, everything she'd found here, the safety, the stability, the growing love she'd been afraid to name, suddenly felt as fragile as soap bubbles. You have 48 hours to think about my offer, Trevor continued, his charm returning as if the threat had never been spoken. I'm staying at the Meridian Hotel downtown, room 412. Don't keep me waiting too long, Elena. I'd hate for things to get messy. As his footsteps echoed down the marble steps and his car pulled away, Elena stood frozen in the doorway, her mind racing with possibilities, all of them terrifying. Behind her, she could hear Lila beginning to fuss and Benji asking Mrs. Pemberton where Mama had gone. The sounds of her life, her children, her happiness, all of it suddenly feeling as temporary as morning mist. She closed the door and leaned against it, her legs shaking with the effort of staying upright. Everything had changed in the span of 10 minutes, and she had no idea how to protect the family she'd finally learned to love from the man who had the power to destroy it all. That evening, Elena sat in the garden where she'd planted marigolds with such hope just weeks before, and tried to figure out how to tell Nicholas that their perfect world was about to crumble. The children were finally asleep after a day that had felt like walking on broken glass. Benji had asked 3 times about the man who'd visited, his intuitive nature picking up on the tension Elena couldn't hide. Lila had been fussy all afternoon, as if sensing her caregiver's distress through some mysterious baby radar. Nicholas would be home from his business dinner soon, probably expecting to find the usual peaceful household. Children settled, Elena reading in the living room, everything exactly as he'd left it that morning. Instead, he'd find her falling apart in his garden, trying to summon courage she wasn't sure she possessed. The sound of his car in the driveway made her stomach clench. Through the kitchen windows, she could see him moving through the house, probably looking for her, probably wondering why all the lights were off except for the small lamp by the patio door. Elena? His voice carried across the garden, warm with concern. Are you out there? I'm here, she called back, her voice steadier than she'd expected. Nicholas appeared in the doorway, still wearing his business suit but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. Even in the dim light, she could see the moment he registered that something was wrong. His easy smile faded, replaced by the alert attention he usually reserved for crisis management. What happened? He crossed the patio quickly, settling beside her on the stone bench they'd installed last month when Benji declared that gardens needed sitting places for thinking. Elena looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap like anchors trying to hold her steady. Someone came to see me today. Someone from my past. Nicholas waited, giving her space to find the words. It was one of the things she'd grown to love about him, his ability to listen without rushing, to let silence exist without filling it with useless comfort. Trevor Morrison, Benji's father. She felt Nicholas go still beside her, the kind of stillness that preceded either flight or fight. After 2 years of silence, he showed up at your door demanding what exactly? Nicholas's voice was carefully controlled, but Elena could hear the edge beneath it. He wants Benji. The words came out in a rush. He's engaged to someone who wants children, and apparently a ready-made 2-year-old is easier than starting from scratch. He's threatening legal action if I don't hand him over. Legal action. Nicholas's tone suggested he was already mentally scrolling through his contacts for the best family lawyers in the state. Does he have grounds? He's Benji's biological father. He signed the birth certificate before he disappeared. Elena forced herself to look at Nicholas, needing to see his reaction to what came next. But that's not the worst part. Tell me. He knows about us. About this job, this house, our arrangement. And he's threatening to twist it into something ugly if I don't cooperate. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, processing. What kind of ugly? Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. He implied that I took this job with ulterior motives. That I've been manipulating you, taking advantage of your grief to secure my position here. That's ridiculous. Is it? Elena turned to face him fully. Think about how it looks from the outside, Nicholas. Single mother gets hired as cleaning lady, ends up nursing the employer's baby, gets promoted to nanny, moves her son into the house. It's not exactly a conventional arrangement. Since when do I care about conventional? Elena almost smiled at the genuine confusion in his voice. Nicholas Rivers, who'd spent months learning to garden with a 2-year-old and finding joy in marigolds, clearly couldn't fathom why anyone would find their situation scandalous. Your reputation matters, she said gently. Your business relationships, your standing in the community. Trevor knows that. He's counting on the fact that you'd rather avoid a messy public battle than fight for someone like me. Someone like you. Nicholas repeated the phrase as if tasting something bitter. Elena, do you have any idea what someone like you has given me? What you've given Lila? I know what I've received, Elena replied. A job that pays 3 times what I was making, a safe place for my son, stability I never dreamed of. But Nicholas, if Trevor follows through on his threats, if he starts spreading rumors or filing lawsuits, all of that disappears, and it takes your peace with it. Nicholas stood up abruptly, pacing to the edge of the garden bed where the marigolds glowed pale yellow in the moonlight. So what does he want? Money? Custody of Benji? And for me to disappear from your life before I cause you any more trouble? And if you refuse? Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. He files for joint custody and drags us all through court. He makes our relationship public in the worst possible way. He destroys everything we've built here. Nicholas was quiet for so long that Elena began to wonder if he was calculating the cost-benefit analysis of keeping her around. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, harder, with an undertone she'd never heard before. Did you tell him to go to hell? Elena blinked. What? This Trevor, who abandoned you and Benji, who disappeared for 2 years, who's now threatening to destroy our family because it's convenient for his new girlfriend's timeline. Did you tell him to go to hell? Nicholas, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. He turned back to her, and even in the dim light she could see the steel in his expression. I understand that some worthless excuse for a man thinks he can walk back into our lives and tear apart everything we've built. I understand that he's threatening the woman I love and the children I consider my own. What I don't understand is why you think I'd let him. The words hit Elena like lightning. The woman you love? Nicholas crossed back to the bench in 2 quick strides, kneeling in front of her so they were eye to eye. Did you think this was still just a job for me, Elena? Did you think what we have here is something I'd give up to avoid gossip? Elena's throat felt tight. I thought you'd realize it wasn't worth the trouble. That protecting your reputation was more important than what? Than my daughter having the only mother she's ever known? Than Benji having the father he deserves? Than me having the woman who taught me how to be happy again? Tears Elena had been holding back all day finally spilled over. Trevor has lawyers, Nicholas. He has money and connections and I have more of both. Nicholas's voice was gentle but implacable. Elena, I've spent months watching you love my daughter as if she were your own. I've watched you teach Benji that family isn't about biology. It's about showing up every day. Do you really think I'm going to let some deadbeat father waltz in here and destroy that? But the scandal will last about as long as it takes people to meet you and realize what an incredible person you are. Nicholas took her hands in his. Elena, I don't care what Trevor Morrison thinks he can do to us. I don't care what gossip he might spread or what lawyers he might hire. I care about you and Benji and Lila and the life we're building together. Elena studied his face in the moonlight, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. All she found was determination and something that might actually be love. What are you saying? I'm saying we fight him. Together. I'm saying we stop hiding what this is and start protecting it. Nicholas's grip on her hands tightened. I'm saying that Trevor Morrison picked the wrong family to threaten. For the first time since Trevor's arrival that morning, Elena felt something stronger than fear stirring in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or possibly just the recognition that she wasn't facing this battle alone. Are you sure? She whispered. Once we fight back, there's no going back to the way things were. Nicholas smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all evening. Elena, I haven't wanted to go back to the way things were since the day you first held my daughter. As he pulled her into his arms right there in the garden where they'd planted hope in the form of yellow flowers, Elena finally understood what Trevor had gotten wrong. He'd assumed that what she and Nicholas had was fragile, temporary, something that could be threatened into dissolution. He had no idea he was about to go to war with a family. The next morning, Nicholas Rivers walked into the Meridian Hotel with the quiet confidence of a man who had built an empire from words and wasn't afraid to use them as weapons. Elena had wanted to come with him, but he'd insisted she stay home with the children. This conversation, he'd told her over breakfast, is going to be between men, and it's going to be final. Now, standing outside room 412, Nicholas felt the familiar calm that settled over him before important negotiations. Except this wasn't about mergers or acquisitions. This was about protecting his family from a predator who'd mistaken kindness for weakness. He knocked once, sharp and authoritative. Trevor Morrison opened the door wearing expensive pajamas and a confident smirk that faltered the moment he saw who was standing in the hallway. Mr. Rivers, I wasn't expecting you. I'm sure you weren't. Nicholas stepped into the room without waiting for an invitation, forcing Trevor to back up or be knocked aside. We need to talk. Trevor recovered quickly, gesturing toward the sitting area with the practiced hospitality of someone accustomed to charm campaigns. Of course, can I offer you coffee? The room service here is excellent. This isn't a social call. Nicholas remained standing, using his height and presence to dominate the space. He'd learned years ago that power wasn't just about money. It was about making other people believe you had the right to control the conversation. Then what brings you here? Trevor settled into an armchair, trying to project casual confidence. If Elena sent you to negotiate on her behalf, Elena didn't send me anywhere. Nicholas's voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made board members shut up and listen. I'm here because yesterday, you threatened my family. Today I'm going to explain to you why that was a mistake. Trevor's eyebrows rose. Your family? That's interesting. Last I checked, Benji was my son, and Elena was your employee. Last you checked was 2 years ago, when you abandoned them both. Nicholas pulled out his phone and opened a folder he'd prepared that morning. Since then, I've had my legal team do some research on you, Mr. Morrison. Fascinating reading. Something flickered across Trevor's face, the first crack in his confident facade. Nicholas continued, his tone conversational but deadly. Did you know that Elena applied for emergency assistance twice during Benji's first year? Once when he had pneumonia and the medical bills overwhelmed her savings, and once when her landlord illegally raised her rent and she couldn't afford both housing and food. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. You were too busy pursuing your career opportunities in California to notice that the mother of your child was choosing between heating and eating. Nicholas scrolled through his notes with deliberate calm. But here's what's really interesting. During that entire 2 years, Elena never once attempted to contact you for support. She never filed for child support, never tried to track you down, never sought legal assistance to compel you to meet your obligations. Trevor shifted uncomfortably. She's an independent woman, I respected that. No, Mr. Morrison. She's a woman with more pride and strength than you deserve, who chose to struggle alone rather than chase after a man who'd already made it clear he didn't want the responsibility of parenthood. Nicholas put his phone away and fixed Trevor with the stare that had made seasoned business executives reconsider their positions. So imagine my surprise when I discover that this same man, who couldn't be bothered to send a birthday card or a Christmas gift, suddenly develops paternal instincts just in time to accommodate his new fiancé's family plans. My relationship with Rebecca has nothing to do with Rebecca Hastings, heir to the Hastings pharmaceutical fortune. Yes, I know about her too. Nicholas smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I also know about the prenuptial agreement her father is insisting on, which specifically requires you to demonstrate family stability and paternal responsibility before the wedding can proceed. Trevor's face had gone pale. How did you? I own a publishing company, Mr. Morrison. Information is my business, and the information I've gathered suggests that your sudden interest in fatherhood has very little to do with love and everything to do with access to your fiancé's trust fund. You don't understand the complexities. I understand them perfectly. Nicholas leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. What I don't understand is how you thought you could walk into my home, threaten the woman I love, and terrify a child who doesn't even know you exist, all in service of your financial ambitions. Trevor stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Elena's told you her version of events, obviously, but there are two sides to every story. Really, please enlighten me. What's your side of abandoning a pregnant woman because you weren't ready for responsibility? I was 25 years old. I had my whole life ahead of me, opportunities I couldn't pursue if I was tied down with a baby. And Elena was 24 with her whole life ahead of her too. But she chose to grow up. You chose to run away. Trevor spun around, his mask of civility finally slipping. So what, you're her white knight now? Riding in to save the day with your money and your mansion?
Bunker.
Elena's a smart woman, Rivers. She knows how to land on her feet. Is that what you think this is? Nicholas laughed, but the sound held no humor. You think Elena manipulated her way into my life for financial gain? I think Elena is a beautiful woman who knows how to make herself indispensable. And I think you're a grieving widower who was vulnerable to that kind of manipulation. The words hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, Nicholas felt the old familiar rage, the kind that had driven him to build walls around his heart after Vivian's death. But then he thought of Elena's hands gentle on Lila's back, of Benji's excited chatter about purple flowers, of the way his house had transformed from a mausoleum into a home. You know what the difference is between us, Morrison? Nicholas stood up, his decision crystallizing. You see Elena as someone to be used. I see her as someone to be cherished. You see Benji as a commodity in your relationship negotiations. I see him as my son. He's not your son. In every way that matters, he is. I'm the one who taught him to tie his shoes. I'm the one who reads him bedtime stories. I'm the one who kisses his scraped knees and celebrates his victories. Biology is just genetics, Morrison. Fatherhood is about showing up. Nicholas pulled out a business card and placed it on the coffee table between them. That's my lawyer's contact information. If you want to pursue custody of Benji, you're welcome to try. But understand this. I have resources you can't imagine, connections in every courthouse in this state, and a legal team that specializes in protecting families from exactly this kind of predatory behavior. Trevor stared at the card as if it might bite him. More importantly, Nicholas continued, I have something you'll never have. I have the love and trust of that little boy. And unlike you, I earned it by being present every single day. Nicholas moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Morrison, if you ever come near my family again, if you call, text, email, or so much as drive past my house, I'll make it my personal mission to ensure that every social contact you and your fiancé have knows exactly what kind of man you are. The kind who abandons his child and then tries to use him as a bargaining chip 2 years later. You can't threaten me. Nicholas turned back with a smile that would have terrified anyone who knew him well. I'm not threatening you. I'm educating you. There's a difference. As he opened the door, Trevor's voice stopped him. This isn't over, Rivers. Nicholas looked back one last time. Yes, Mr. Morrison, it is. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded exactly like victory. 2 hours later, Nicholas sat in his garden watching Elena push Benji on the swing they'd installed last month, while Lila napped peacefully in her stroller nearby. The late morning sun cast everything in golden light, making the marigolds glow and turning Elena's hair into spun sunshine. She looked up as he approached, reading his expression with the intuitive accuracy she applied to everything. How did it go? Nicholas settled beside her on the garden bench, pulling her close with one arm while the other reached for Lila's tiny hand. It's over, he said simply. He's leaving town today. Elena's body sagged with relief. What did you say to him? The truth, that he picked the wrong family to threaten. Benji's laughter rang across the garden as his swing carried him higher, and Nicholas realized that this moment, this perfect, ordinary moment, was worth fighting any battle to protect. Nicholas? Elena's voice was soft, uncertain. Yesterday in the garden you said... She paused, gathering courage. You said you loved me. Nicholas turned to look at her fully. This woman who had saved not just his daughter, but his capacity for joy. I do love you, all of you, more than I thought possible. Elena's smile was radiant. I love you too, all of you. And as Benji called for them to watch his super high swing and Lila stirred with a contented sigh, Nicholas understood that some battles weren't just worth fighting, they were worth winning. 1 year later, Nicholas stood in the same garden where marigolds had once symbolized hope, watching Elena in a simple white dress as she knelt to help Benji scatter flower petals down the makeshift aisle. Daddy Nicholas, am I doing it right? Benji whispered loudly, his small hands full of yellow petals that seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight. Perfect, buddy. Just like we practiced. It wasn't the wedding Nicholas had imagined having when he'd proposed 6 months ago. There was no grand cathedral, no hundreds of guests, no elaborate reception that would make the society pages. Instead, their intimate ceremony was taking place in the garden they'd created together, witnessed by the people who mattered most. Elena's mother, Mrs. Caldwell, Mrs. Pemberton, and a handful of close friends who understood that love didn't need an audience to be real. Lila, now walking with the determined wobble of a 16-month-old, toddled ahead of Benji wearing a tiny yellow dress that matched the marigolds. She clutched a single flower in her chubby fist, more interested in trying to eat it than carrying it down the aisle. But her presence made everything perfect. The minister, a kind woman who'd spent an hour with them the week before learning their story, smiled as she watched the children's procession. Are we ready to begin? Nicholas nodded, his throat tight with emotion he hadn't expected. After Vivian's death, he'd never imagined standing at another altar, promising his heart to another woman. But Elena had taught him that love wasn't a finite resource. It was something that grew larger when shared, something that honored the past while embracing the future. Elena appeared at the end of the petal-strewn path, and Nicholas felt his breath catch. She'd chosen a simple dress that flowed around her like sunshine, her blonde hair loose and adorned with a single yellow marigold. But it wasn't her beauty that made his heart race. It was the look of complete joy on her face, the way she seemed to glow with happiness as she walked toward their future. Benji abandoned his petal duties to run to his mother, wrapping his arms around her legs. Mama, you look like a princess. Elena laughed, the sound carrying across the garden like music. Thank you, sweetheart. Are you ready to help me marry Daddy Nicholas? Yes. Then we'll really be a family forever, right? We're already a family, Benji. This just makes it official. As Elena walked toward him, Nicholas felt the last walls around his heart crumble completely. This woman had entered his life as hired help and become his salvation. She'd taken his broken family and made it whole, not through grand gestures, but through countless small acts of love, nursing his daughter when she cried, teaching him to find joy in muddy handprints, showing him that grief and happiness could coexist. When she reached him, Nicholas took her hands, amazed as always by how perfectly they fit together. Dearly beloved, the minister began, but her words faded into background noise as Nicholas lost himself in Elena's green eyes. I need to tell you something, he whispered, leaning close enough that only she could hear. Elena's eyebrows rose in alarm. Now? During our wedding ceremony? Now, Nicholas smiled, his voice soft but certain. I need you to know that you didn't just save Lila that first day. You saved me too. You walked into my house and brought it back to life. You made me remember what it felt like to be happy. Tears gathered in Elena's eyes. Nicholas, I know we're not traditional. I know this isn't how most families begin. But Elena, I can't imagine my life without you in it. Without Benji calling me Daddy Nicholas and teaching me about purple flowers. Without watching you turn my daughter into the happiest baby in the world. Without coming home every day knowing that whatever else happens, I have this, I have us. Do you, Nicholas Rivers? The minister's voice cut through their private moment. Take Elena Brooks to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and cherish in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live. Nicholas never took his eyes off Elena's face. I do, more than anything. And do you, Elena Brooks, take Nicholas Rivers to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and cherish in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, For as long as you both shall live. Elena's voice was steady despite her tears. I do, forever and always. Then by the power vested in me by the state of Connecticut, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Nicholas, you may kiss your bride. As Nicholas leaned down to kiss his wife, Benji's voice rang out across the garden. Yay! Now can we have cake? The small gathering erupted in laughter, and as Nicholas pulled Elena into his arms, he heard Lila clapping her hands and babbling something that sounded suspiciously like Mama and Dada run together. Did she just... Elena pulled back, looking toward Lila with wonder. I think she did. Nicholas grinned. I think she just called us Mama and Dada. Elena's tears spilled over completely then, and Nicholas understood. After months of being Lila's caregiver, of loving her like her own child but never quite having the right to claim that role, his daughter had just given Elena the greatest wedding gift possible. As they turned to face their small audience, their family, Benji ran to them with his arms outstretched. Nicholas scooped him up while Elena reached for Lila, and suddenly they were all holding each other in the middle of their garden, surrounded by the flowers they'd planted together and the love they'd cultivated from the most unlikely beginning. Are we really married now? Benji asked, his small face serious. We're really married, Elena confirmed. Good. I was getting tired of explaining why Daddy Nicholas wasn't my real daddy when he obviously is. Nicholas felt his heart expand until he thought it might burst. I love you too, buddy. All of you. Later, after cake had been eaten and pictures had been taken and their guests had gone home with doggy bags and smiles, Nicholas found himself alone with Elena on their garden bench while both children napped inside. No regrets? He asked, pulling his wife, closer to his side. Elena looked around at the garden where they'd planted hope in the form of yellow flowers, where they'd weathered threats and emerged stronger, where they'd just promised to love each other forever. Only one, she said softly. Nicholas's heart skipped. What? Elena smiled, the expression radiant with mischief and love. I regret that it took me so long to realize that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as accidents. That sometimes getting fired from your cleaning job leads to finding your true home. Nicholas kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her hair and the lingering sweetness of wedding cake. Elena Rivers, he murmured, testing out her new name. I like the sound of that. So do I. Though I have to admit, I'll always think of you as the woman who walked into my house and changed everything. And I'll always think of you as the man who saw past what I did for a living to who I really was underneath. As the sun began to set over their garden, painting everything in shades of gold and contentment, Nicholas reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 18 months ago, he'd been a broken man living in a beautiful house that felt like a tomb. Today, he was a husband and father surrounded by laughter and love, and the sweet chaos of family life. Sometimes the best stories began with the most ordinary moments. Sometimes love arrived not with fireworks and grand gestures, but with a crying baby and a woman brave enough to do what needed to be done. Sometimes home wasn't a place at all. Sometimes it was simply the people who loved you enough to stay. And as Benji's voice drifted from the house, Mama, Daddy Nicholas, Lila's awake and she wants to see the flowers. Nicholas understood that their story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Full circle. 5 years later, Elena Rivers stood in the same kitchen where she'd once prepared breakfast as an employee, watching her husband teach their 4-year-old daughter how to crack eggs without making a mess. Gentle sweetheart, Nicholas murmured to little Vivian, named for the woman whose memory had blessed rather than haunted their growing family. Just like we practiced. I got it, Daddy, Vivian declared, her green eyes, so much like her mother's, sparkling with concentration as she successfully cracked an egg into the bowl. See? No shells. At the kitchen island, 7-year-old Benji rolled his eyes with all the superiority of an older brother. I could crack eggs when I was 3, Vivi. Could not. Could too. Children. Elena laughed, settling baby Grace into her high chair. At 18 months, Grace was the perfect blend of her parents. Nicholas's dark hair and serious expression, but with Elena's gentle nature and ready smile. No egg fights in the kitchen. We saved those for the garden. Lila, now 6 and every inch the protective big sister, looked up from the coloring book she'd been working on at the breakfast table. Remember when we had that egg fight last Easter? And Daddy got egg in his hair? Your father started that fight? Elena protested, grinning at Nicholas across the kitchen. I did not start it. I merely responded to Benji's unprovoked breakfast assault. You threw scrambled eggs at a 7-year-old. He threw them first. The easy banter, the comfortable chaos, the sound of children's laughter mixing with the sizzle of bacon on the stove. This was everything Elena had dreamed of during those lonely years when she'd believed happiness was something that happened to other people. Through the kitchen windows, she could see the garden that had become the heart of their home. The original marigolds had spread and multiplied, creating borders of yellow sunshine around vegetables that Benji tended with scientific precision, and flower beds that Lila designed with artistic flair. There was a sandbox where Grace would soon learn to dig, a swing set that had been upgraded twice as their family grew, and a greenhouse where Nicholas had discovered an unexpected passion for growing tomatoes. "Mama, can we visit Grandma Brooks after breakfast?" Lila asked, looking up from her drawing of what appeared to be a purple elephant riding a bicycle. "We can call her," Elena agreed. "But remember, she's in Florida now with Mr. Harold." Elena's mother had surprised everyone by falling in love at 68 with a retired widower who shared her passion for crossword puzzles and early morning beach walks. Their elopement to Key West had been the scandal and delight of the senior community, and their monthly FaceTime calls always included updates on their adventures. "I still can't believe Grandma got married before I did," Benji muttered, returning to his eternal complaint about being the only unmarried member of the family. "You're 7, Nicholas pointed out reasonably. "You have time. Jasper Peterson's brother got married when he was 8. They had a ceremony in his backyard and everything. That was make-believe, buddy. Still counts." Elena caught Nicholas's eye across the kitchen, and the look that passed between them was full of shared amusement and deep contentment. These morning conversations, these small domestic moments, had become the treasures of their life together. "Speaking of weddings," Nicholas said, pulling fresh coffee from the pot, "Mrs. Caldwell called last night. She wanted to thank us again for the recommendation letter." "Did she get the position?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer from Nicholas's smile. "Head nanny for the Pemberton family. They specifically requested someone with experience in difficult babies." Elena laughed. "Poor Lila. Her reputation for being fussy is going to follow her forever." "Hey," Lila protested. "I wasn't fussy. I just had opinions." "Strong opinions," Nicholas agreed diplomatically. "Very strong opinions about everything. I still do. Like, I think we should get a dog. A big fluffy one that can play with Grace when she gets bigger." "Dogs are a big responsibility," Elena said, though she'd been thinking the same thing lately. "I'm responsible. I feed the fish every day and I help water the tomatoes and I read to Grace when she's fussy." "You do," Nicholas acknowledged. "You're very responsible." Elena watched her husband consider their daughter's request with the same serious attention he'd once given to million-dollar business deals. In the 5 years since their wedding, Nicholas had transformed from a man who approached parenting like a problem to be solved into someone who found genuine joy in discussions about everything, from pet ownership to the relative merits of different crayon colors. "What kind of dog were you thinking?" he asked Lila. "A golden retriever, like the one in my book about the farm family. They're good with babies and they like gardens and they're really smart." Elena bit back a smile. Lila had been campaigning for a golden retriever for months, armed with research that would have impressed a congressional committee. "I think that's a conversation for after Grace is walking steadily," Elena said diplomatically. "So this summer?" Lila asked hopefully. "Maybe this summer." Benji looked up from his eggs with interest. "Can I help pick out the dog? I'm good at picking out pets. Remember how I picked out the perfect fish for the pond? You pointed at the first fish you saw," Nicholas reminded him. "And he was perfect, wasn't he? Mr. Bubbles is the best fish ever." The fact that they had a koi fish named Mr. Bubbles was just one of the many ways their life had become beautifully ridiculous. Elena sometimes marveled at how far they'd all come from that first desperate day when she'd nursed a crying baby out of instinct and changed the trajectory of 4 lives forever. "Daddy, are you sad that you don't go to the office anymore?" Vivian asked suddenly, with the intuitive perception that 4-year-olds sometimes displayed. Nicholas had made the decision to work primarily from home 2 years ago, after realizing that business trips and long office hours were making him miss too many important moments. The publishing company had adapted beautifully to remote management, and Nicholas had discovered that he was actually more productive when he could hear his children's laughter in the background. "Not even a little bit, sweetheart. This is exactly where I want to be." Elena felt the familiar warmth that came whenever Nicholas reinforced his commitment to their family. He'd given up the prestige and social aspects of office life without a moment's hesitation, choosing presence over prominence in a way that still took her breath away. "What about you, Mama?" Benji asked. Do you ever miss your old job? Elena paused, considering the question seriously. Did she miss the uncertainty of cleaning houses, never knowing if she'd have enough work to pay rent? Did she miss the exhaustion of juggling multiple clients while worrying about childcare? Did she miss the loneliness of raising Benji alone, wondering if she was making the right choices? No, sweetheart, I don't miss it at all. What she'd found here was so much more than financial security or even love. She'd found purpose, partnership, and the kind of daily joy she'd never dared to dream about during those difficult early years. After breakfast, while Nicholas took the older children to the garden and Vivian helped him check the tomatoes, Elena found herself alone with Grace in the quiet kitchen. The baby babbled contentedly in her high chair, playing with the wooden blocks that had once belonged to Lila, and before that to Benji. Elena looked around the space that had become the heart of their home. The expensive marble countertops and professional-grade appliances remained, but the kitchen had been transformed by the addition of children's artwork on the refrigerator, a chalkboard where the family left messages for each other, and the comfortable chaos of a household where 4 children ranged freely. On the windowsill sat a small framed photograph from their wedding day, not the formal posed shots, but a candid image captured by Elena's mother. In it, all 4 of them were laughing at something Benji had said. Lila balanced on Nicholas's shoulders while Elena held baby Grace. They looked exactly like what they were, a family that had found each other against all odds and chosen to build something beautiful together.
Kind of looked like
Ma, Grace babbled, reaching for Elena with chubby arms. Yes, sweet girl, Mama's here. Elena lifted Grace from the high chair and carried her to the kitchen window, where they could watch Nicholas, Lila, Benji, and Vivian examining something fascinating in the vegetable garden. Probably another worm, if Benji's excited gesturing was any indication. You see your family out there? Elena murmured to Grace. Your daddy who reads you stories every night, and your big brother who teaches you silly songs, and your sisters who fight over who gets to help give you baths? Grace gurgled happily and pressed her face against the window, leaving tiny handprints on the glass that Elena would probably clean later, but would definitely photograph first. This was what happiness looked like, Elena realized. Not the dramatic moments or the grand gestures, but the ordinary Tuesday mornings when your biggest concern was whether to allow discussions of dog ownership at breakfast. It was the accumulation of small joys, daily choices to love and be loved. The gradual construction of a life so beautiful you sometimes had to stop and marvel that it belonged to you. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Harold and I are planning a visit next month. Fair warning, we're bringing matching Hawaiian shirts for the whole family. No arguments. Love you all. Elena laughed, imagining Nicholas's expression when presented with a tropical print shirt. He'd wear it without complaint, of course, because that's who he'd become. A man who measured success not by quarterly profits but by his family's happiness. Outside, Lila was now conducting what appeared to be a very serious lecture about proper composting techniques, while Benji and Vivian listened with the attention usually reserved for television shows. Nicholas caught Elena's eye through the window and gestured toward their children with an expression of mock helplessness that made her heart swell with affection. Your family is pretty wonderful, isn't it, Gracie? Elena whispered to the baby, even when they're completely ridiculous. As if summoned by her thoughts, the back door burst open and Benji raced inside, dirt-streaked and breathless with excitement. Mama, come quick. Lila found a baby tomato that's shaped exactly like a heart. It's like the garden is celebrating love. Elena looked down at Grace, who was clapping her hands with delight at her brother's enthusiasm, then out at her husband and daughters who were waving for her to come see this miraculous heart-shaped tomato. Come on, sweetheart, she said to Grace, settling her on her hip. Let's go see what your family has discovered now. As they walked toward the garden where her children were calling her name and her husband was smiling like a man who'd won the lottery of life, Elena felt the profound contentment that came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged. She'd entered this house as someone hired to clean it. She was staying as someone who'd helped fill it with love. And really, Elena thought as Vivian grabbed her free hand and pulled her toward the tomato plants while chattering about heart-shaped vegetables and the magic of gardens, what more could anyone ask for than a life that had grown beyond your wildest dreams? Sometimes the most beautiful stories began with a crying baby and a woman brave enough to trust her instincts. Sometimes love arrived disguised as desperation, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, the family you created by accident turned out to be the one you'd been meant to find all along. What did you learn from this story? Have you ever experienced love that grew slowly, built on daily acts of care rather than dramatic gestures? Share your thoughts about the power of chosen family in the comments below.
Shots, guys.
Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.